Hello, welcome to Not For Sale Japan's Cafe number 29. Let's learn about new revised laws on protection of women in Japan. And during this time, we'll have three presentations. The first one, Adult Video Appearance Damage Protection and Relief Act. This is a law that has already come into being. And the next one also, a new law to support women in need. This is also already been enacted. And the third point is amendments to the criminal code, including raising the age of sexual consent. This one is still in a draft proposal form, so it's in progress. And so I've been noticing this year in the news, Japanese news, little headlines in English, I've been noticing that there have been these things that have happened, but to try to read the Japanese articles has been difficult. So I was asking, and some other people too were asking about how do we get this information to people in Japan who are foreigners but interested in human trafficking. So we decided to tackle this as our little project here, a staff project. So we are not professionals and we are not lawyers or anything like that. So it's kind of like a school project. We've three pairs have done each of the three laws and done their research and trying to translate the very difficult Japanese legalese into somewhat easy to understand English. So again, we're not professional. This is the research that we've done and what we've been able to come up with and try to explain it to everyone. But we're still kind of a work in progress too. And especially the third one, it's also not everything has been decided yet. So please bear with us, but we just want to get this information out to you all because you're thankfully interested in women's rights, especially, and human trafficking in Japan. So like I said, they've been in the news, but hard for us foreigners to grasp it. So without further ado, I will introduce our director of our NGO, Not For Sale Japan, is Mariko Yamaoka, and she's going to present on Adult Video Appearance Damage Prevention and Relief Act.
Okay, thank you, Bunny, and I will stop this first and wait. I will start my slideshow here. Does it show the whole screen? Okay. I will talk about the Adult Video Appearance Damage Prevention and Relief Law. This is this title of the law itself. The English version, English translation is not. It doesn't seem to have the official translation. So I will just use this this name for this law, but in this presentation, I think I will just call it a new AV law. Okay. So my name is Mariko Yamaoka, and I'm the director of Not For Sale Japan. So thanks for coming. And I will have like 15 to 20 minutes to talk about this new law. So this is what I am basically going to talk about. What is adult video? What is the damage caused by the AV appearances? And what does human trafficking have to do with this issue? And background of the enactment of this new law, contents and problems of the new law, and the prospects for the future, and lastly, consultation services and reference articles. So what is an adult video? So pornographic, it's a pornographic image of adult, 18 years or older. And it's now mostly sold for online viewing. It used to have the DVD, and it still has the DVD format, but now mostly sold online. And some are made by amateurs as well as by production companies. And some make money through pay-per-view on video sharing sites. And since it is not child pornography, the production, sale, and possession itself are not currently illegal. But however, distribution of obscene materials, something that are not pixelated, unpixelated, or uncensored, is illegal indeed in Japan. And well, this is a very shocking figure, but 30,000 to 40,000 new adult videos are produced annually in Japan. So roughly it's about 100 per day. Wow. So the content of adult video has become really extreme these days. And honban, we call it honban, real sexual intercourse is the norm, and often performed without contraceptives. Well, with those privately photographed, privately videotaped ones, especially without contraceptives. So there are risks of pregnancy and STDs. And violence against women is becoming more extreme. I don't want to go over this, but you just read this. Very, very bad things are happening for the women. And since the pursuit of realism is very much featured, showing women's refusal or dislike is very often done. And some videos actually depict the actual criminal acts, such as rape, indecent exposure, and molestation. So this is the reality of adult video right now. So what is the damage caused by adult video appearances? Because of the shortage of actresses, the demand for younger, and sexually inexperienced women is high right now. And there used to be false scouts. There were so many rampant, so many false scouts. They were posing as modeling or talent agencies to deceive and force women to sign the contracts. Then they used the contract as a shield to force the women or coerce the women to perform in the adult videos. And sometimes they are threatened to tell their parents or schools. And they are sometimes asked to pay a penalty or compensation if they refuse. Or they're sometimes told that, do you despise this industry or something like that? So that they are, kind of coerced to appear in the adult videos. So even if they agree to perform only once, they are pressured. A lot of times they are pressured to perform again and again. The victims' lives are completely changed due to self-hatred, self-doubt, distrust of people, PTSD, etc., and isolation deepens. Those are the types of damages. Of course, there are some actresses that are not affected by those things, but there are many actresses or performers who were damaged by those adult video appearances. And of course, if these are online, these are circulated online. So once online, it's extremely hard to erase the video completely. So those who are regretting being on the adult video, they are tormented for the rest of their lives. So to delete the video, there are some ways to delete the video, but you have to give your own name, the real name, to the agent or contact information to ask for the deletion. So it's a kind of privacy. You have to reveal your own privacy. So it's a hurdle for those who want to delete the video. so sometimes the women are so tormented, and they are so suffered. They are driven to suicide. Because they are treated as the outsourcing contract. I mean, they treated as the sole proprietors to engage with the outsourcing contract. It is really hard to prosecute the production company for violations of the labor standards. So those are the damages. Now, what does these adult video program have to do with the human trafficking problems? The human trafficking is the act of taking advantage of a person's vulnerable position, or using deception or threat to recruit, transfer, or confine a person for their own benefit in order to exploit that person. So coercion to perform in adult videos is a form of human trafficking in Japan. The difficulty for victims to claim damages because they have a sense of self-responsibility, difficulty improving the threats behind closed doors, etc., etc. So this is very difficult for the victims to claim the damages, and the difficulty for victims to refuse after one or two appearances, even if they agree at first. Those 2 points are also a common feature of trafficking in persons, the victims of the trafficking in persons. So that's why we treat this kind of things that is happening in Japan as the human trafficking cases. So background of the enactment of the new adult video law. So this was rather a very rapid or quick movement of this enactment of the new law. So I will explain why. Now, so I first told you that adult video is not child pornography. So if you are 18 years old, you can be in the adult video and it's legal. But 18 and 19 years old rarely appeared in the adult videos because there was this right of revocation or cancellation of contracts for minors. So this is the civil code right. So therefore, it was customary to have women over 20 in adult videos, as they cannot cancel a contract unconditionally. So 18 or 19 years old, they can cancel the contract unconditionally, any contract. However, the age of adulthood was lowered by other, I think it was civil code also, but other legislation. The age of adulthood was lowered to 18 years old. So if a person reaches 18, it's now not easy to cancel the contract. In the past, so they didn't use the 18 or 19-year-old girls in the adult videos, but they scouted the 18 or 19 years old girls and prepared them for gravure or other videos or photographs. And once they reached 20, they used them to perform in the adult videos. So we can assume that the scouts may have been targeting high school age of 16 or 17 years old, starting this past April. That was the guess from the past deeds. So PAPS and Human Rights Now, those are the two support groups. They appealed to the Diet members and public opinion asking, is it okay for high school students to appear in adult videos? And that was back in March 2022, this year. So they wanted this revocation of contracts for minors. They wanted this right to be, how do you say, to revive in this case of adult videos. So, so that the high school students would not be targeted as the adult video appearances. So what happened to the new adult video law? First, this law was enacted and went into effect in June 2022. It was passed very quickly and championed by many groups. I mean, the 6 parties from the ruling parties and opposition parties, both of them. And this law is applicable regardless of age or gender. And this applies also to non-professional pornography, not only for the production companies, but those privately or amateur pornography productions. And this will be reviewed within 2 years. And the good thing is that during the diet debates, actual situation in which young women are unwillingly coerced to appear in adult videos, and the serious human rights violations in the shooting of adult videos themselves, those things were revealed. So those are the good things during those diet debates. Now, the contents of the new adult video law. So there are obligations of business operators and the rights of performers. So the business operators, that means the adult video production companies, they have to give the written contract to the performers, and they have to explain the contents of the contract. And they have the obligation to ensure the safety of performers during the filming. So they cannot do those terrible things to the performers. And they are prohibited for filming for 1 month after signing the contract. So they cannot just say, tomorrow you come to the adult video shooting place after signing the contract. So there is this cooling off period of 1 month. And they are prohibited publication for 4 months after filming. So this will give the performers to cool down again after filming, to rethink about their filming. So there are rights of performers. So performers may refuse to engage in sexual acts against their will. So even though they have the contracts, they can refuse. And they can review the filmed images before publication. And this is the most important thing, that the performers may unconditionally cancel their contracts for 1 year from the date of publication of the video, even if they agreed when filming. So this is the thing that those support groups wanted for those 18 years old and 19 years old. But this was far better than they thought they wanted, far better than they wanted. So this applies to everybody, any age or gender. So they can unconditionally cancel the contracts. And performers can demand the suspension of sales and distribution. So this is the right to demand an injunction. In some cases, it's not always, but they can demand those right. So this is the contents of the new adult video law. So this is an epoch-making law. those Human Rights Now and PAPS, those two groups at least, very much appreciate this enactment of this new law. But of course, there is a problem with this law. Some would say that isn't this shooting of adult videos itself a form of violence against women? And it's surely a commercial sexual exploitation in the first place. So this is one opinion, and some women's support groups opposed the law itself because it would make sexual intercourse a legitimate business recognized by the state. But other support groups, like PAPS and Human Rights Now, they welcomed the prompt passage of the law, even if it was somewhat flawed, and this led to a widening of the divide between those two groups. They are both supporters of the women's rights, but there were some divide between those two groups. And there is another problem, and there is a risk that amateurs selling on their own that the amateurs will go underground, so making the damage even more difficult to see. So there is this aspect that are feared. But prospect for the future, we don't know what will happen next, but at least we know that the adult video industry is actually being affected. Fewer videos are being released, at least after the enactment in June. However, a petition drive against the law has been started by the current porn stars, porn actresses who are popular, who claim that their livelihood is threatened. So we don't know what will happen for those trends. And as of December 6th, there has been an arrest based on this law. It was the first such arrest. And this director of a video production company did not give the contract to the performers, and they were not, the performers, they were not told that the videos would be sold unpixelated. So this was the first arrest, and PAPS, they say that using this arrest as an example, it would increase the deterrent effect. So that means that this would be a good trend. So these are the two consultation services that we can give. One is official one-stop support center for victims of sexual crimes and sexual violence. So if you push the hashtag 8891, if you dial, you will be connected to your nearest one-stop support center. And this PAPS, this is a good support group, and you can consult them if you are in trouble, or if you know anybody who is in trouble with these adult video problems. And these are the reference articles. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for coming and listening to us. So Mariko's presentation was pretty much condensed, I think, and mine is rather brief. So anyways, I made my best research on this. So now I'm going to talk about this. So women's assistance law. So this is a shorter version. So I'm in the bracket. The name, formal name in Japanese is so-called Women with Difficulties Support Law. So this law, Women's Assistance Law, passed by the Diet members legislation in May 2022, and will be enacted in April 2024. So it will be in not 2 years, in year and several months. So why is a women's assistance law necessary? And what does this mean? Actually, until now, the only law that provided a basis for supporting women who are in a more vulnerable position in the social structure compared to men was the anti-prostitution law in 1956. So what is anti-prostitution law? Since the establishment of Meiji government, prostitution in Japan has been under the jurisdiction and protection of the government, known as a public prostitution system. More than a decade after World War II, it was finally prohibited by law. So, in addition, women who have engaged in prostitution are subject to protection and rehabilitation. So before talking about our new law, let me briefly explain this old law. So what is anti-prostitution law? Anti-prostitution law has 4 chapters. So one is general provisions, purpose of the law, definitions, prohibition of prostitution. Chapter 2 is prohibited acts and criminal penalties. Chapter 3 for correctional institution and correctional punishment. And chapter 4 protective service for women. So then this chapter 4 was the only law that could serve as the basis for supporting women in Japan for 60 years from 1956. So this chapter 4 was the only law. Oops. So this chapter 4 was the only law that could serve as the basis for supporting women in Japan for 60. Oh, I already read this. On the basis of chapter 4, women's shelters were created for the protection and the rehabilitation of women who were prostitutes or were in a vulnerable position and at risk of becoming prostitutes. In the sense that prohibited prostitution, it was a landmark. It was a landmark. However, landmark at that time. However, it was an outdated law and framework that did not fit the modern social situation. So currently, chapter 1 and 2 remain, but chapters 3 and 4 have been removed and the women's assistance law was created. So I'm going to talk about a bit about problems with anti-prostitution law. The purpose of this law is to guide, protect, and rehabilitate women who are at risk of engaging in prostitution, thereby preventing prostitution. So in other words, to control, guide, and rehabilitate women with difficulties as if they were committing a crime. So the social structures or the backgrounds leading to prostitution is not questioned. Also, although relief is addressed in Chapter 4, the reality is to manage, guide, and rehabilitate. And also, there is a problem with women's protection facilities. Women's protection facilities were created based on the anti-prostitution law. However, at present, prostituted women are not only target group. In 2001, the law for the prevention of domestic violence and made victims of domestic violence eligible. Since 2004, victims of trafficking in persons are also covered. In 2013, stalking victims are also included to this facility. So in October, I had a chance to listen to the lecture of Ms. Chiyoko Yokota, the head of Izumirio, one of the women's shelter. She said like this: currently, none of the women living at Izumirio are prostitutes. However, there is a contradiction in that the only law to support these women is the anti-prostitution law. So, and as I said, women's shelters, women's protection facilities are now accepting victims of domestic violence, and so they need to hide their location. It is difficult for general public to find and know about the roles of women's protection facilities. And it is also difficult for women living there to have contact with society or neighborhood communities. And more, before entering women's shelter, women's protection facilities, the victims are required to enter a so-called temporary shelter. In the temporary shelter, they are not allowed to bring in cell phones, neither not allowed to going out. So many women are not interested in using the protection facility because they feel they will be monitored because of so many rules. Rather than being deprived of their freedom and monitoring at the facility, they stay at home or wander the streets, even if they are abused or to have risks. As it is, women who really need help won't get the help they need. To change the state of public institution, a law is needed. So after years of campaigning by activists, researchers, lawyers, and citizens on women's issues, the Women's Assistance Law, Women with Difficulties Support Law, was finally passed in May 2022 as a comprehensive law to support and empower women. So how has the Women's Assistance Law changed from anti-prostitution law? So there are so many differences, but I just point out important things. The purpose has totally changed. So promotion of women's welfare and respect for human rights, realization for gender equalities, are let's see. So these are the three things. Excuse me. And other perspectives that were not in the anti-prostitution law were clearly stated and incorporated. The law stipulates that it is a responsibility of national and local governments to take necessary measures to support women. So in this law, the perspective of women's welfare and human rights was introduced. Until now, victims of trafficking in persons were protected in women's shelters under the anti-prostitution law. So it's kind of very, very twisted. The situation was very twisted. From now on, as women with difficult problems, their human rights will be respected, and they will be subject to protection and support. I mean trafficking victims. So here I made a comparison table to understand. I would like to take some time for you to read. And as Mariko said, we will hand you these slides later, so you have a chance to take a look anyway later. So governments are going to change the names of the service and the services, or the names of the consultants. It's pretty much similar, but they put the word support. So that is the that should be a big difference. We need to make a difference. So the biggest challenge, still, of course, there is a challenge. The biggest challenge, according to Ms. Yokota, is whether public institutions and supports can change whether public institutions and supporters can change their mindsets and attitudes towards women. Since they have been managed and teach the women under the anti-prostitution law, now really need to emphasize and to be compassionate with respect for their own will. And trainings and human resource development in this sense is necessary. And the regulations also stipulates collaboration with private organizations. How to build relationships with private organization is also an issue to those public centers. Oops. So anyway, although there are many challenges, a public budget is being used for women in difficult situations. Finally, comprehensive women's welfare will begin in this country. So thank you. This is my presentation.
Thank you very much, Nozomi. You did a great job with trying to condense that difficult law and put it into English. If I just could sum up, maybe before, the anti-prostitution law was making the women as the criminals because they were they were prostituting themselves, but it wasn't necessarily of their own will. They were trafficked and kind of forced to be prostitutes. So
Right.
we don't want to treat them as criminals, but to give them this kind of support. So that's
Thank you,
great.
Danny, for supporting that perspective. Thank you.
The first slide is amendments to the criminal code, including raising the age of sexual consent. And as I said at the beginning of the cafe, not everybody was at the beginning, that we're just doing research on our own and trying to do our best to get this difficult, it's even difficult in Japanese to understand, to make it understandable for us English speakers. So we're not completely confident 100% of the translations and the concepts, and they're still in progress, especially with this particular one, because this has not yet been a law that has been passed. So they are in process of amending it right now. So if the 4 points will be the main articles of the current penal code, and then the proposal, the draft proposal that they want to revise it to match the reality of sexual offenses. And the third point will be the proposal to raise the age of consent for sexual intercourse. And lastly, the crime of non-consensual sexual intercourse. So the main articles, the current penal code, we have two. Article 176, a crime of a forced indecent act. This is a person who via assaults or threats commits an indecent act against a person 13 years of age or older. They shall be punished by imprisonment with work for 6 months to 10 years. The same shall apply to a person who commits an indecent act against a person under 13 years of age. So it kind of seems the same, but that's what they have it in Japanese. Then the number 177, the crime of forced sexual intercourse. And again, the person who is through assaults or threats has sexual and anal oral intercourse with a person 13 years of age or older shall be punished by imprisonment with work for not less than 5 years. And again, the same applies to one with as intercourse with a person under 13 years of age. So that's the current law. But they are now drafting a proposal. They have drafted a proposal to revise this provision to match the reality of actual sexual offenses. And let me just say that under the current penal code, which we just talked about, a person is guilty of forced intersex. A person is guilty of forced sexual intercourse if she or he actually assaults or threatens the victim, but only if the assault is so severe to make it extremely difficult for the victim to resist. But this criteria of having this extreme difficulty in resisting is very ambiguous. How do you know how much the person resisted? So there actually been many court decisions that have acquitted perpetrators on the grounds that there was no evidence of the victim resisting. So we're trying these new draft is trying to help solve that problem. So they have come up now with 8 acts in the draft proposal for the crime of forced sexual intercourse. And as of October of this year, they had these 8 points. So the same thing as before, using assaults or threats, but point 2, that it would be so bad that it would cause the victim to have a mental or physical impairment, or by getting the victim drunk or using drugs, and then they have no way to resist, or it's very difficult for them to resist once they are under the influence of alcohol. Or if they are actually asleep, like in a state of unconscious, if they're sleeping and then are assaulted, of course they cannot resist. If you deny the victim time or opportunity to refuse, so you would come up on a person suddenly and surprise them, and they have no idea what's going on and they can't refuse. There's no time. Or it's a little bit similar, but using fear or shock to startle, surprise the person. So again, they're difficult to refuse because they weren't expecting it. They were just on a date or in a situation and they weren't expecting this to happen. It just is so shocking. And then number 7 is producing a psychological response, which is hard to understand, but in this case, the victim has been abused for a long time, so they feel totally powerless and unable to refuse. So already they're psychologically damaged because of years of abuse. And then number 8 is, sounds difficult, but I'll explain here. Persons of economic, slide it over here. Persons of economic or social influence cause anxiety concerning possible disadvantages suffered if a victim does not comply. So putting it in simpler words, like if you have a teacher and a student relationship, and the student really doesn't want to have sex, but they feel like if they refuse the teacher, they have such influence in that person's life that they will be at disadvantage if they refuse. Or the same thing with a coach and the athletes. The coach has a superior position and influence over the younger athlete, and they feel like they have to go along with the coach's desires. So the points of these amendments, these discussions to amend the law started in response to the growing voices of victims who felt like, how could I, how can I prove that I'm resisting? So now, having these, at least these 8 acts, then the person could be prosecuted. And the assault and threat requirements have been, as I mentioned, that includes these 8 specific acts that take into account the physical and mental condition of the victim and the relationship they have with the other party. So in addition to the existing assaults and threats or intimidation, the proposal also includes like making the victim to consume alcohol or drugs, causing the victim to be in a freeze or shock or in such a numb state. They're just so surprised or startled they cannot refuse. So these are some improvements in this making the law a little bit better for victims. And they also want to establish a new crime of grooming. So the term grooming is often used for animals, but in the context of sex crimes, it refers to methods of approaching and psychologically controlling, especially a child, for sexual purposes. And then also to establish a new crime of photography. So voyeurism, like watching as a third party. So to prevent this voyeurism, this new crime of photography has been included to control the act of filming, which is often done covertly. The victim doesn't even know they're being filmed, these obscene images, and then you provide it to a third party to watch. So we want to make this a crime. Then included in this new draft proposal is a proposal to raise the age of consent for sexual intercourse. So currently in Japan, the age is 13 years old for sex consent. So under 13, it's punishable, but we want to raise it to at least 16 and make it punishable. So you can see from the illustrations here what will happen. The age at which consent to sex can be determined has been proposed to raise the current 13 and above to 16 years and above. However, in the discussion, some people argued that people who are the same age and want to have sex with each other, that they could be punished. So now the law is going to be, the draft is that it will be applied to cases where there is an age difference of 5 years or more between the two partners. If a person commits an indecent act against a person under 13, then he will be charged with the same crime as now. So Michio did this little illustration here. So if like 2 13 years old want to have sex, it's going to be legal, or it is legal now because it's 13. And then, and like 2 15-year-olds. But when you get to like a 15-year-old and a 19-year-old, that's okay. But if it's a 5 years and 15 and 20, it's going to be a crime. So this kind of age difference of only 5 years is a little bit, or of 5 years is a little bit arbitrary and a little bit confusing. So we're not sure about this part of it, but you can see the cases where it would not be prosecuted, but then the cases where it would be prosecuted. Okay, then the most confusing thing for me was this fourth aspect, the crime of a non-consensual sexual intercourse. So because of things that have been going on with this draft, and there were ambiguities in the draft again about how much can you prove that person is resisting or not, especially if it's behind closed doors, they can't prove how much they resisted. So then different groups got together and put in a written request for the introduction of a crime of non-consensual sexual intercourse. And this was a request made to a legislative council on November 28th of this year. And the purpose of the request was that the draft that was released in October doesn't meet the expectations of those calling for amending the penal code in the first place. It doesn't accommodate the victims. It's not in line with international trends, because it is a fundamental human right to prohibit non-consensual sex acts. Thus, the criminal code should be revised to fully guarantee it. So they want to make those 8 acts a little bit more specific so that the perpetrators will more easily be criminalized. And concerning the age of sexual consent, just so you can see what's happening in other countries, because in America, it's 16 to 18 years old for consent, depending on the state. So for example, in Michigan, it's 16, New York, 17, California, 18. In the UK, Canada, Korea, and Taiwan, it's 16, but interesting that Korea only raised their age from 13 to 16 2 years ago. And then Sweden and France, the age of consent is 15 years old. France also just recently raised it from 13 to 15 and last year. Germany, it's only 14 years, and Japan, it's only 13 years. But in Japan, it's the same as the Meiji era, 115 years ago. So we really want this to go through, that the age of sex consent will be raised to at least 16. And this also has to do with, as our staff, we were talking about this, and other people, NGOs have mentioned it as well. that we must think carefully about the need for sex education in order to avoid creating victims and perpetrators. So the current curriculum that is used in Japan by the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology, MEXT, this has since 1998 included a provision commonly referred to as 2 restraint rules. And I think before that, teachers were able to more freely explain a little bit more about sex education, but now they have these restraint rules. So in 5th grade science, the process of human fertilization shall not be covered. And in 7th grade junior high PE and health, even the process of pregnancy is not yet covered. But the contradiction of this is that the age of sexual consent is age 13. So you're allowed to have sex at age 13, but they're not teaching about it in school, because by the time you're in 7th grade, you're 12 or 13. So there's, I mean, ideally, the parents will be teaching about sex ed to the kids, but as we know, that doesn't often happen when parents are too embarrassed to bring this up. And a lot of times kids get their sex education from pornography or things like that. And then the interesting contrast of, the Japan's curriculum and however, the International Guidance on Sex Education, revised in 2018, released by UNESCO in 2009, in the section on reproduction, the following learning objectives are provided for each age group. So even as young as ages 5 to 8, to start explaining where babies come from. Ages 9 to 12 explain how pregnancy occurs and can be avoided, including methods of contraception. So again, the contradiction of that, now in Japan, it's legal to have sex at age 13, but they have these restraint rules where they are hesitant to talk about it as teachers in school, to give good guidance about how babies are made. There was a TV program that Michio showed me that they were saying that some teenagers think that just by kissing they could get pregnant or things like that. There's really a lack of information out there. And even on Cool Japan the other day, they were showing a program, Cool Japan is where foreigners are talking about things happening in Japan, and they covered some of these restraint rules. And this is for public school, but there's a private school in where I live in Setagaya. There's a private school where the teacher is using different good material to teach elementary and junior high kids about sex. So that was kind of interesting to see the difference of public and private. So thank you. This was our presentation by me and Michio Nomura.